Hey everyone, welcome back to the JavaScript course. So inside this video, we'll be looking into the JavaScript scopes. And if you find this interesting, let's get started right away. So in this video, we'll be exploring about the JavaScript scopes. So inside my VS Code, I've opened up my index file, my style.css file, as well as my script.js file. So there is some basic boilerplate code present inside my index file and some basic styling given to the style.css file and a basic console.log text inside our script file. Okay. So now let's start exploring about the JavaScript scopes. Okay, so we have essentially three kinds of scopes. That is the global scope, the block scope, and the function scope. Okay, so essentially we have three kinds of variables inside of JavaScript. That is var, let, and const. Okay, so var was pretty much introduced when JavaScript was introduced. That's the first kind of variable we have, and the var variable is gonna have a global scope. Okay, whereas the other two kinds of variables, that is let and const, it's gonna have a block scope. Okay, and these two variables were introduced in the ES6 version. So now let's start exploring about the global scope. Okay, so let's initialize a var variable. Let's say var x equals to 10. So on line number 9, we are creating a new variable, that is x, and we are assigning a value of 10 to it. Okay, so this x is accessible anywhere inside of the script file because it's a var variable and it's gonna have a global scope, right? So let's console.log the x value and save the file. Let's come back to our web page. Yeah, so there I go. Inside the console we are able to see 10. It's coming correctly. Okay, so now let's start. Let's initialize the scope. Let's say just open braces over here, and let's try to access x value over here inside the scope. Even though we are inside the scope, we can access the value of x because we are using a var variable and it has a global scope, right? So inside the console again we should see the value of 10, right? So save the file. Yeah, so there you go. We are getting 10 again in the console. So that's the basics about the global scope. So now let's start exploring about the block scope, that is for the let and const variables, right? So let's initialize let b equals to 20. Okay, so we are on line number 16. We have initialized b by assigning a value of 20 to it. Okay, so this b variable is only accessible within this scope, that is from 15 to 17, that is within these two braces, right? Because we have a particular kind of scope over there. So let's try to access that value. So console.log of b, save the file. Okay, so yeah, we can see the value of 20 coming in the console because b is accessible within that scope, right? Because it is correctly performed, it's correctly accessed in that particular scope. So now let's try to access b outside of the scope, that is outside of the braces. So now we should get a reference error saying b is not defined, right? Yeah, so there you go. We are getting a reference error which says b is not defined. So that's the reason, because b has only access until this line, until line number 17 within these two braces. So in case you try accessing b outside of the scope, we are gonna get a reference error, right? So the same thing is gonna happen with const as well. So let's say const y equals to 60, and let's console.log of y and save the file. So of course this is going to work because on line number 20 we have initialized y and we have assigned 60 to it, and we are just getting the value of y within that scope itself. So it's going to work and it's going to give us 60 in the console. Yeah, so there you go, 60 is coming because it is const and we are in the correct scope itself. So if you try and access the y value outside of the scope, it's again going to give us a reference error because it is a block scoped variable, that is we are using const, right? Yeah, so there you go, we are getting y is not defined because of the const variable we are using. Okay, so that's it about the block scope. So now let's move on to the next thing, that is the function scope. Okay, so let's say a function, my function. Okay, so this is a basic function that we have initialized. So let's say let n equals to 100. Okay, so inside function my function on line number 20 we have initialized a n variable and we have assigned a value of 100 to it. Okay, so this is it's almost called as a local scope, that is function scope, that is the n value is only accessible within this function. Okay, so in case you try to access the value of n outside the function, it's not going to work. So save the file. So you should get 100 in the console. Okay, why it's not working? Okay, because we have not called the function, right? So my function, and save the file. Yeah, so there you go, we are able to see 100 in the console. So let's say if we access this value like outside of the function over here. Okay, so it's going to give us again reference error which says n is not defined, because it's going to have a local scope, that is it's local to this particular function. Basically n value is only accessible until this particular code, right? It's only accessible inside the function. If you try and access it outside of the function, it's not going to work. It's going to give us a reference error, as you saw. Okay, so I think that's it about the basics of the scopes in JavaScript. That is, we went and explored about the global scope, the block scope, and the function scope. Okay, I think that's it about this video. Let's see you in the next video, and then thank you for watching.